Hello, welcome again to Word Crumbs. We are in week 4 of Easter. Actually, we are near the end of the week. And as usual, I'd just like to do a kind of summary of what we are praying this week. But before that, a little recap of the Easter season. So Easter could seem like kind of a long time with very little activity as compared to Lent. Because Lent we have the Way of the Cross, we have different devotions, and it seems to be the tradition that we have that in Easter time is more of quiet. So the activity finishes in the Holy Triduum, and we are invited to a more contemplative style of prayer. If you notice, we have been looking at the Gospel of John, which is actually a gospel of contemplation, where we see a lot of images of Jesus. We're invited to reflect a lot and even think about our faith and about who Jesus is for us. So somehow it can seem a bit long, or the word could even be draggy sometimes when we go through the liturgy, because it's not so much about new ideas, it's not so much about more activities, but it's more about deepening of what we already know and trying to draw out implications for a resurrected life. So that's why if it seems a bit like, oh, so where are we now in Easter? It's because of that. No, it's more of a time to contemplate how to concretely put into practice what we understand from our faith. So before I go proper into the reflection that we did for this week, or the 4th week, just a little recap of the whole first 3 weeks. No? The first week we went through the octave, the so-called encounters of the risen Christ and his disciples, between them. And so it's more about the narratives of how Jesus began appearing to his disciples, to show that he was alive and to encourage them in this Christian life. The second week of Easter, we were looking more particularly at the sacrament of baptism. As we said, the center, one of the core of our Christian lives, especially as Catholics, are the sacraments. But it's not the be-all and end-all of Christian life. So it's very helpful to deepen on what the sacraments actually mean, what are the implications in our lives, and how we can try to personalize and put them into practice in our own particular or personal situations, our own families, which could be different from others. So the second week we looked at the sacrament of baptism and the importance of being guided by the Holy Spirit in our baptized Christian lives. And not just to go through the ritual of being forgiven our sins, but seeking a new way of living. So that was week 2. Week 3 was more about the sacrament of the Eucharist or the Mass. And there we were invited once again to a deeper or more spiritual understanding of the presence of Christ. Know what it means to believe in the real presence. That real doesn't signify only physical or material or only visual, but real especially signifies the spiritual aspect, the invisible aspect of the presence that is really with us, of Christ. So the importance when we celebrate the Eucharist to try to understand and to go to see, or rather to experience the mystery of the Eucharist, of what we don't see, and not just be too concerned of what we see and we stay at the material aspect of our faith. So we need to go beyond that physical or material aspect of receiving Jesus, but to grow in that spiritual aspect of receiving that relationship with him. So we're not receiving something in the Mass, we are actually receiving someone, and that makes a whole lot of difference in the way we live our faith. So that was the 3rd week. So now we're in the 4th week, and the image that the 4th Sunday of Easter that the Church presents to us is that of the Good Shepherd. We called it Good Shepherd Sunday or Vocation Sunday. And the point of reflection for the fourth week actually is this. Now, if you have followed through, we have seen John chapter 10, which is the passage about the Good Shepherd. We've seen John chapter 12, which mentions a bit about his relationship with the Father. And the shepherding is about eternal life, once again. And today we have John 13 and John 14 as well. So the theme is the Good Shepherd. And the question is, why is the image of the Good Shepherd so important for us as Christians, and as Catholics especially? In fact, everywhere we go, we see this image. In the Catholic bookshops, we see Jesus with the crook or the staff. We see him with a sheep or a lamb in his arms. It's everywhere. And the Good Shepherd seems to be a very central image of our Christian faith. So what is it all about? Now, the Good Shepherd speaks a lot about Vocation Sunday, because it's the Christian vocation to be a shepherd. To be a good shepherd, and not just to stay as a sheep, is a sign of Christian maturity, in other words. In other words, all of us as baptized Christians, we are called to be shepherds, and not just to stay as sheep. And if you just look at our own church, the way we perceive ourselves as Catholics will affect the way that we live. And if we just consider ourselves as sheep and not as shepherds, then we go to church mainly to receive, to be cared for, to be looked after, to be treated with tenderness by the shepherd. But it will be very different if we conceive ourselves as shepherds, then we go to church not just to be cared for, but to care for others. We go to church not just to be treated with the tenderness of the shepherd, but to treat others with the tenderness of a shepherd. We go to church not just to be fed or to be nourished, but as well to nourish and to feed others, to lead them to the right pasture, as a shepherd does. So it's this Vocation Sunday, or Good Shepherd Sunday, is not just a day to pray for priests, the ordained priests. It is a Sunday that we are all reminded of, all of us as baptized, we have the same vocation to be shepherds in the church. So let's deepen a little bit on this, because you might say, no, but that's the role of the priest. He's the shepherd in the church, which is true. The Pope is the shepherd of the universal church. The bishop is the shepherd of his territory, his diocese. How can we all, as baptized, be shepherds? Because shepherding also has this image or this connotation of leadership. How can everybody lead in church? Surely there must be leaders and there must be followers. Now what I'm trying to expound here, or I will try to expound, is that all of us are leaders and all of us have to lead. And the key here is to understand what kind of leadership. So if we look at the Bible itself, or in the Gospels, in the story of Jesus, you will notice that there are, maybe you can come up with more. At least for myself, I have seen 4 kinds of leadership in the Gospels. So the first kind of leadership is the leadership of office. Because you are a leader because that's your role. So as Jesus said, you have to obey what the Pharisees and the scribes say, because they have that authority by their office from Moses. So Moses gave them that office, Moses gave them that authority to lead, so that there's this leadership, or there's this authority that comes from office. So Jesus said that about them. That's in Matthew 23, if you are interested. And there are those leaders, or those who have authority because of power. So for example, Herod was a leader, Pilate was a leader, and they led because of the power that they had. So it's not just the office. So maybe they don't even have that office, but because of their power, they could lead, no? And they had authority over others. Because if they were not obeyed, we know what would happen. No, the crucifixion was a sign of leadership through power. So it helps us also to reflect on the kinds of leadership that we want and that we should emulate as Christians, or shouldn't emulate. So there's leadership of office, there's a leadership or authority of power, and another kind of leadership is a leadership of cause. A very charismatic kind of leadership, if you like. No, if you read the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 5, near the end, Gamaliel, he spoke of two leaders, Thaddeus and Judas. Judas and Theudas. Sorry about that. So if you just check the end of Acts chapter 5, you will see that they were leaders. Why? Because of political causes. Because they wanted to free Israel from the Romans, and they were revolting. So their revolt led people to follow them. And they had that authority as well because of the cause. It was not because of the power, because they didn't have power. It was not because of their office, because officially they shouldn't exist, but because of the cause, the charismatic cause that people followed them. Of course, we are told that their cause didn't last that long, but it's one form of authority or leadership. So that's the third, a cause. Leadership of office, leadership of power, leadership of cause. And the last leadership that, of course, I would like to mention is the leadership of Jesus, the authority. The Gospels, all of them speak of Jesus teaching with authority. He was a leader, and he attracted many people. But I would say that his leadership was not a leadership of office. He wasn't an official rabbi. His leadership was not a leadership of power. In fact, he was a carpenter, so he didn't have any power to lead. His leadership was not really of a political cause either. In fact, he was not there to say to people what they should do. His leadership was a leadership of values. Of human values, of values of the kingdom. And if you remember the Beatitudes, he had concrete values that he not only proposed to others, but that he lived. And his leadership, his authority, came from that. If you remember, they said he taught with authority in the Gospels, unlike the scribes and Pharisees. Because his leadership didn't just come from office. It came from values that he was somehow living and transmitting by what he said and by what he did. And I think here is the key of Christian leadership, of shepherding. If you remember this, we are coming back to the call or the vocation to be shepherds, where all of us are leaders. We are all called perhaps not to be leaders of office. Perhaps not all of us are called to be leaders with power or even influence. Perhaps not all of us are called to be leaders with certain causes, that we promote and we invite everybody to follow us. But all of us are called to be leaders with values. By the way we live, by the way we speak, by the things we say as well. Leadership of values, that is shepherding. Now, in that sense, perhaps it's easier to understand the call to be shepherds and the importance to develop our vocation. And this third sacrament, if you like, I would like to discuss, is the sacrament of confirmation. We were looking at the sacraments of baptism, introduction into a Christian life, and the Holy Spirit guides us that we shouldn't stay at the door, but we should enter and live it. The second one was the sacrament of the Eucharist, where we come to be nourished in our relationship, our very personal and communal relationship with Jesus as our God. And this week, when we discuss about confirmation, It is a special sacrament of mission, sacrament of service, or a sacrament of ministry. So, mission, service, ministry. This is a very important aspect of Christian life, or the Christian vocation that we need to deepen on. And I think you will agree with me that many of us as Catholics, we need to be more conscious of our call to be shepherds, to serve in church, to serve, to minister, to have a ministry in church, to do mission in church. Ministry or ministries, not just for the church, in church, but not just for the church, but for the world. So this is our shepherding mission, to transmit the values of Jesus in the world. Now, what are these values? How can we grow in them? What are the ministries that we can take on? I mean, these are questions that I will invite you to try to reflect about, and even to ask maybe if you have a Christian group, or if you are in a certain church environment, or friends who are believers, this could be reflections that you could think about. What is your specific ministry in the church? What is your way of expressing your mission in the church? When I speak about ministries, I'm not just talking about the ministers of communion, which some of us might be doing, and it's a very valuable support. I'm not just talking about music ministry either, or the choir. In the sense, I'm not just talking about ministries for mass, okay? Not just ministries to support the liturgies, which is a very central part, as I said. Mass, sacraments, liturgy is a very central part of our church, but it's not the be-all and end-all. There need to be other kinds of ministries that serve the Christian community and that also serve our society. So, for example, and I'm sure they are already existent, in the parishes that maybe you are going to, ministries of service, of feeding programs, of charity works, of visiting the hospices or hospitals, ministries of comforting the sick, ministries of, there's so many ministries of charity that we can do, to gather the elderly, to have community service, community gatherings. There's so many ministries that we can do, but also for the church, clean up ministry, in the church, ministries of organization, pastoral ministries, counseling for those who are psychologists or have some experience in pastoral counseling, of leadership even, of guiding youth ministries, of developing children's liturgies. There's so many ministries. What is your ministry in the church? In what way are you, what is your avenue of practicing being a good shepherd? Now, I'd like to go beyond also just the avenue itself, of what it means to transmit the values of the Good Shepherd in our society. Because there are things that we can do in church, and I think it's very helpful if we can participate in a concrete way. But also we have ministries in the world, and it could be through our work. So there are some professions that could be more obvious, for example, like teaching. A teacher is a shepherd to her students. Or if you are an employer, then of course you are a shepherd to your employees. Or if you're working in a government office or in a service sector, then your sheep are those people that you serve, that you welcome. So it would be very interesting also for us to see how we can bring this shepherding ministry into our workplaces, into our societies. If we have businesses, for example, if we are doing sales, you are still a shepherd there. And what are the qualities of a shepherd that we can emulate in Jesus? Now, I'd like to go back to the Gospel of Sunday, which is John chapter 10. And if you'd like to, you could also look it up. There are certain qualities of a good shepherd, and I think they're useful for us to try to meditate on, and to try to practice in our lives, to reason them out first, not to meditate in a sense, to see do you resonate with them? Do you find that they're worth practicing these values or not? No? As for myself, I just like to share 3 values that Jesus transmits there. And it's in in the middle of the chapter, from chapters 11 to 18. And there he speaks about he has other sheep that belong to him, and then he has to gather them as well, so that they will be in one flock. And he would give his life for them. So there are 3 values here that I see Jesus as a shepherd, he dedicates his life to. I mean, giving your life for something, I would translate it as dedication, not literally dying for it. No, sometimes we have to. Maybe it'll be our call, but most normally and probably giving our life for something means dedicating our time, our efforts, and even our money to that cause or to that value. So there are 3 things here that I see Jesus dedicating himself to: unity, diversity, and equality. So once again, unity, diversity, and equality. So we've heard the expression, right? Unity and diversity. But here Jesus talks about unity. He wants one flock. One flock doesn't mean uniformity, and that's why diversity comes in. One flock in our differences, one flock in our different personalities, one flock in our different ways of doing things, different world visions, different perceptions. One flock, if you like, even in our different political systems, our economic systems. One flock, unity in diversity. So Jesus dedicates himself to this very difficult balance, oneness in the midst of being different. And the third one, which is very important, is equality. So we may be different, but we should not treat each other with a different level of dignity. We have all the same equal dignity as human beings. So we are one. We could be different, but it doesn't mean that we should treat those closer to us, those who are more similar to us, in a better way than those who are different. So these 3 qualities are actually very key for any Christian communal existence. Unity and diversity, recognizing that dignity as well, that is equal in all. Now, at this moment, I'd just like to discuss a bit why this is important, this unity and diversity and equality. Because if you just notice, take one of those qualities away in our society, in any society, and even in our global society, take any one of those characteristics away, and that's going to take away our future. I just invite you to ponder on this. Now there's a lot of reflection about what's going to be after coronavirus. What's after coronavirus? We're not out of it yet. We still have a walk to go. But I think this is really a time when all of us are invited to reflect. What's the society going to be like after coronavirus? And what is the role of Christianity to kind of influence, to lead society, to be a shepherd of society with the spiritual values of Jesus for the sake of our future, our common future? Just imagine a society that is not united, it's not one. Well, straight away, we can see certain tendencies today in politics, in economics, in social organization of people. What happens when we don't admit diversity in a society? Look at discrimination. Look at the difficulty of inclusion, of integration, of trying to build new societies with a lot of migration, with a lot of challenging situations where we need each other. We need the diversity. and not to fix only on a uniform way of doing things or seeing the world. We cannot anymore. And that's very clear, has been brought up in our situation now with this virus. It's very clear that it's bringing out a lot of this division, and if we keep on accusing each other because we are different and being suspicious of that difference, then it's difficult to imagine a very united future for this world. But it's not just about seeing the difference, it's about treating each other with equal dignity. And that is so Christian, and it's so challenging as well. How to treat the other one who's different from you with that same equal dignity, respect, and just because people do things in a different way, it doesn't mean they're less than us, or less intelligent, or less cultured even, etc. So this equality of dignity, the oneness, and the diversity. And I just like to recap this part about equality. If you look at our society, the main cause of division, and this is something that we need to take care of for our future, and Pope Francis is mentioning a lot about that. For him, the main cause of our division today and the difficulty to imagine a good future is inequality. And it begins with economic inequality. In unequal opportunities and opportunities to a quality of life. And that inequality is growing and growing and growing in our society. And imagine what would happen when you are in that level of inequality where you are disadvantaged. What would be your reaction towards unity, for example, towards differences, if you don't feel that in that inequality that you are being taken care of? In other words, shepherding takes care a lot of equality, because shepherding is about making people feel and know for a fact that they are cared for in the global system. So if you don't feel cared for, you don't feel safe, in other words, then what comes in would be fear. You will feel threatened, and you would feel that you need to defend your cause for yourself. So these implications of Good Shepherd Sunday, of this vocation towards transmitting the values and living the values of unity, of diversity and equality, is not just something secondary, it's not just something optional, but you can see that it's something very important for our society to come. We need, as Christians, we need as a church to promote these values. We need to lead the world with these values as shepherds. We may not have that office, we may not have that power, we may not have that a very clear cause or political cause or social cause in that sense, but we need to be clear in our spiritual cause to change the mind of this world. The world is tending towards polarization, of a very radical separation, division. And what comes from a disconnection from each other is not just indifference, but many times suspicion and hatred as well. The world needs people, needs Christians who will lead them to see that it's possible to live with other values. And that was the whole mission of Jesus Christ. So it's not just, when we talk about ministry, mission, service, it's not just about doing something in church, because that is good in itself, but it could be misleading in the sense that we think we are already helping the world by doing something. What we really need, as in this vocation to be shepherds, is to grow in the way we live these values and promote these values. Great if you're serving in church, great if you have a ministry in church, please continue, but be conscious of how you're creating unity in church, how you're creating a value of diversity, accepting and loving diversity and the differences of each one, and be very careful of how you're living and transmitting in your service in church the values of equality, and not forming groups, not forming preferences, or not allowing it. First, not following it, and second, not promoting it, and thirdly, trying to go the opposite and to promote equality. Know that we all share the same dignity, the same importance in the Christian community first, and then the same importance and care in the world. Christianity has a big role to share that hope of these three great values. But we have to show it by the way we live first with one another. As Jesus says, no, it is by your love for one another that the world would know that you are my disciples. Not John 13:35, which is one of the Gospels for this week. And just leave you in this reflection with the Gospel of Friday, which is John 14. Jesus says very clearly there, do not let your hearts be troubled. You trust in God, so trust also in me. There are many rooms in my Father's house. And if there weren't, I would have told you. And you know, these are just the first two verses. And it's very telling, if you could read the rest of it, where he finishes the gospel today on this Friday in John 14, verse 6, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So he's trying to say there very clearly, look, if you want a future for your world, for our world, you have to follow this way of unity, diversity, and equality. And the main thing that we need to promote here is to go against the culture of fear. He's saying fear and anxiety, because that is what causes division, takes away unity. That is what causes a desire for uniformity, because we are afraid of the one who's different from me. That's then the main cause of fear, that I'm not being taken care of, is inequality. Do not let your heart be troubled. You trust in God, trust in me, trust in my way. There are many rooms in my Father's house. There's a place for everyone. And that is the way that we are meant to create. That is kind of atmosphere or environment, the kind of world that we are meant to create, a place for everyone. Everyone is taken care of. So how are we meant to do it? I invite you to ponder in your own situation, because all of us have such diverse contexts, situations, and circumstances that I wouldn't be able to give a very general rule or activity where you can be a shepherd to promote these three values. What I can say is that please ponder on these three values. Reflect deeply on them, on unity, on diversity, and equality. And maybe from there you would be able to see how you can be a shepherd, how you can be a leader with these values in your circumstances, in your place. Learn from the Good Shepherd. Meditate again on John chapter 10. Try to follow the liturgy. This week is going to be very beautiful, and the weeks to come, we're going to touch on the other chapters of John, 14, 15, 16, as a preparation for Pentecost. But there, what is beautiful about these coming chapters is that Jesus is going to open his heart, the heart of the Good Shepherd. He's going to share us the deepest motivations and the values that moves him behind being a shepherd. It is there that we can learn from him and to try to meditate on our faith. Do we believe in those values? How can we believe more in them? And how can we grow in believing in them in the practice? And I think that's the most important thing. There are many Christians, we are many in the world. And if each one of us tries to ponder on our role as shepherds, we are all sheep of God, and that will never change, but we need to be shepherds of others. Let us take this vocation to be shepherds seriously and to say, my vocation, if I'm married, I'm single, I'm religious, is just as important as the vocation of the priest. No, the vocation of the priest to be a shepherd is not more important than married people, for example, just because there are fewer priests. Now, there are fewer priests to serve the church, that's true. But if you think about it, there are fewer people, Christians, who are actually serving in society. And that's where the urgency comes in for all of us, not just the priests, to develop the vocation as shepherds. So once again, blessed Easter. Let us continue reflecting on our roles to be shepherds of promoting a society of unity, of diversity and equality.